Good evening. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with LaRouchepack.com, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's broadcast on the LaRouche Pack website. You're tuning into the weekly Friday night live webcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. This is going to be the broadcast for March 22nd, 2013. We will be following our usual format tonight, except, again, as we did last week, Mr. LaRouche has requested that tonight we again begin with a question that has come in from a very high-level institutional source in Washington, D.C. So I will begin tonight's broadcast by reading this question to Mr. LaRouche. The question reads, Mr. LaRouche, in light of your comments last week, and in anticipation of the weekend Schiller Institute conference coming up this Saturday, commemorating the 30th anniversary of President Ronald Reagan's SDI speech, we would like you to answer the following question. There is, to this day, significant debate over whether the Reagan SDI offer, in which you played a crucial role, was a failure or a success. Significant scientific and technological progress has been made towards realizing the dream of mutually assured survival, and there are efforts that you cited last week to revive the Russian-American cooperation at the highest level. What lessons are to be learned, and what is to be done to assure that this collaboration between two great nations can actually succeed fully this time? Thank you.
Well, this occurred under special circumstances. It started to move shortly in the latter part of that decade, and I had some influence in various quarters. I actually initiated a good deal of this, but it would not have happened by my initiations, but a number of people who have been leaders in the intelligence community of the United States for some time came forward to me and suggested we start talking about things. This led into the condition where we had representatives from Germany, leading figures from Germany, leading figures from France, leading figures from Italy, leading figures from other parts of the world, including Argentina, for example. And the agreement was we should move in that direction. The thing was decided through a process which I was involved in. It's on the record. And President Ronald Reagan, at that time, pushed it through. And unfortunately, we had, in the same time, we had a change in the leadership of the Soviet Union. And a British influence, shall I say, bum, was then the head of the Soviet Union. He sabotaged the effort, but it was he was simply acting as a British agent under the orders from the Queen of England at that time. So, but Reagan was committed to going forward with this. He made another public attempt at that before. He made a speech on that subject, as well as the negotiations he made. He made remarks toward the end of his career that whether or not it was going to be done in his time, it had to be done. And I think that is a proper part of the whole process. He not only had picked up on the SDI, he'd been inspired on that not just by me, but by others. He went for it again, the second attempt through the U.S. to get this thing going. And when he was about to leave office, he said he would bequeath this responsibility to somebody because it had to be realized in the future for mankind. So that was the essence of the matter. As to the quality of the effort made then, I would say from my personal knowledge, because I was dealing with the people and institutions involved, and I knew them and knew what their opinions were at that time, that this attempt is something which was merely postponed. We've now come to the point that it would not be possible to postpone it longer. But the fact that we did it first that we repeated the effort was essential to our ability to bring it off now. Without what we had done, my own role was about the last quarter of the 1970s. And I had initiated this, but I had picked up all these responsibilities as well. And with all these steps, which we made, step by step, the preconditions for ever bringing in an SDI would never have happened. So what those who are responsible today face the responsibility of fulfilling something which was necessary even then and is more necessary than ever today. Without the precedent we set during the late 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s, it would never have been made possible. So I can speak for a lot of people who are now deceased. I'm magically not quite deceased. And they did their duty. And if there's any possibility of saving humanity today from a terrible outcome, much is owed to them. The present point is that we've got to, the whole world system, as a monetary system, as a financial system, and so forth, is in its present form, is doomed to extinction. It could be the extinction of nations because they're no longer functional. Or it could be the extinction of the populations of nations because a thermonuclear war is launched. And we were on the edge of the potentiality of a thermonuclear war under this current President of the United States, and particularly under the Queen, who is his real master. So therefore, what's being done on this now is something which is essential for all mankind. And the people in the U.S. military establishment who are leading their part in this job are actually now an integral, essential part of what is needed if this is ever going to come off, which means if civilization as we have known it ever exists after these times.
I'm going to ask the first question tonight. It'll be a quick follow-up on what you began with, and then we'll proceed to our usual format. But I want to say a few things just pertaining to what you have begun with. The world remains on the edge of war. But there has been a historic resistance inside the United States from the patriotic leadership against this war, really stretching all the way back to the point at which you warned that there would be the potential for a outbreak of a hot war between the United States versus Russia and China, which was the point of Obama's decision to invade Libya. For example, General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Not only will General Dempsey be going to Moscow in the coming weeks, as we discussed last week, to meet with his counterpart in Moscow to find what he himself said would be common ground on the missile defense issue, but also he has continued to pour cold water on the drive for war in the Middle East, most importantly in Syria, which would not just be a repeat of Libya, but it would be the trigger point, as you have said, for a new Balkans conflagration leading into a World War III. At the CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, at the beginning of this week, on Monday, General Dempsey was appearing, and in response to a provocative question from the British defense attaché, who said, look, isn't Syria just like Bosnia? You went into Bosnia in the 1990s. Why do you show a failure to act in Syria? And Dempsey did not take the bait, and instead he emphatically stated that there is no military option for intervention in Syria that he would recommend. He said, and this is a quote, The military application of power should be the very last instrument we employ. We're doing planning, and I can always provide options. But again, I don't think at this point I can see a military option that would create an understandable outcome. And until I do, it will be my advice to proceed very cautiously. Now, in the context of that, after the asteroid strike in Chelyabinsk, Russia, there has been an increasing density of calls from the leadership of Russia, from all sides, for what they're calling the SDE, the Strategic Defense of Earth. And the most recent development on this were hearings that occurred in the Russian Federation Council, which is the upper house of the Russian Duma, in which their major emphasis was that we need international collaboration, keystoned by a collaboration between Russia and the United States. Now this week, in the United States House and United States Senate Science Committees, there were also hearings on this subject, which is significant. It was in the House Space Science and Technology Committee and in the Senate version of the same committee. However, despite very important elements of the discussion that were brought up by members of Congress and some of the witnesses, two major things stood out. Number one, Mr. Holdren, who is Obama's science advisor, and has gone on record saying that we should sterilize human beings to reduce the world's population, genocidalist in his history, was asked by a congressman, what would we do at this point were we to see an asteroid hurtling towards New York City? And the only answer that Holdren had to say was, pray. Just give the city up for dead and pray. Now, the other missing element from these hearings was a clear reciprocation from the United States side for international collaboration with Russia, according to what Russia has put on the table in the upper house of the Duma, for international collaboration around the SDE, with both components of the SDE included, asteroid defense and also a revival of the SDI as a shared technology for missile defense. So my question, which I'd like you to answer, is what is it that can be done in the context of the major international conference that the Schiller Institute and EIR are hosting this weekend to ensure that the United States does reciprocate the calls that are coming from Russia for a shared SDE?
Well, I think that despite my years and the wear and tear which it shows around the edges of that experience, that as long as I am still able to function, I think we have a good chance, because I have a record, particularly on this and particularly from the 1970s on. And that record has come to the fore repeatedly under various occasions along the line. And so that around the world, among people who are thinking people, that is, who actually count, who mean something, we're not just babblers, that my role in this process is understood. Now, for example, the attacks on me, which have been made particularly since the beginning of the 1980s, these attacks were based on the fact that I had succeeded in bringing off this with Reagan. And therefore, the determination was that I should be punished and should never be allowed to influence important events again. That wish has not been fulfilled by them. I'm still here, I'm still functional. And you will see that now, as in certain parts of Europe and in circles in the United States today, that anybody who understands SDI and SDE knows today that that was my baby. I created it initially on really a strange kind of impulse. It was a logical impulse. I just was disgusted by the fact that we had given up on this thing. The U.S. military and officials had given up on it at that point. So I revived it in a sense. I was lucky because a number of people, particularly from the old OSS, who were still alive and leaders, and who played a very important role in the early years of the Reagan administration as well. They were typical, but I had leading figures in France, around the Gauls. That's the only kind of Frenchman I really like. And then you get the same thing in Germany. People in Germany who were veterans of World War II, period, who came to the same cause. General officers in Italy, the same cause. Key figures in Argentina, the same cause. India, the same cause, and so forth. So despite the fact that I have been, shall we say, punished, that's what the term was used on saying, you're being punished because what was the argument say? You went ahead without our permission. That was the official thing. Go to jail. You went ahead without our permission. So that's essentially the issue. So because of that, my role in that pattern, and because of the defamation that went with the whole business, when this thing comes up, people roll their eyes and say, "He's still around? What's he doing?" Well, I've been around longer than they have, and who knows what.
Thank you. I would like to ask Leandra Bernstein to come to the podium to address the situation which is currently ongoing in Cyprus.
Now, earlier this week during the Policy Committee discussion on Monday, you referred to the current week as the week that was. And truly, in every sense of that statement, I believe that's coming to fruition. So, with the situation in Cyprus, which broke last weekend, I'm assuming that a number of people know what the situation is, that the private banks were suffering. And in exchange for the suffering of the private banks, the potential bankruptcy of these banks, the people of Cyprus were the intended victims who were to suffer. So, it was announced that the Cypriot banks would require a 10 billion euro bailout. And just to get a little perspective, that's about 1/3 of the country's GDP. And this idea was hatched not within Cyprus. This did not arise from the Cyprus parliament, but from the Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF. And now Cyprus was going to be the guinea pig for a new bailout mechanism called the bail-in. And you really have to hand it to the authors of this policy for being so innovative with these terms. But the bail-in was intended to be a tax on depositors, anybody with fewer than 100,000 euros, which is covered as much like the FDIC coverage in the United States. Guaranteed. Under 100,000 euros was to be taxed at about 6%, just taken out of the account. Over 100,000 was to be taxed at approximately 10%. Now that was voted down in the parliament with an immense outcry from the people of Cyprus. But anyone who believes that voting down of the expropriation of measure of depositors was the end of the crisis is frankly nuts. So the most recent, one of the more recent developments that will hatch over the weekend is that the ECB is threatening to cut off all liquidity to Cyprus if they're not able to come up with 5 billion euros over the weekend. That if they're not able to come up with that money, then when the banks eventually open, which is apparently scheduled to be Tuesday, it was supposed to be Tuesday of this week, and then Thursday, and then Tuesday of next week, so if they ever open, the ECB will not grant any liquidity to these banks if Cyprus denies the terms of accepting a bailout. Now, it's a very rapidly moving situation, and there are immense implications, which is what I think a lot of people would like to get your reading on. There have been major reactions from Russia toward the beginning of the week, largely because this, as most people know, a large portion of the deposits in Cyprus are from large Russian companies, oligarchs, and the likes. And it was known when Cyprus joined the European Union that they were a tax haven, that being surrounded by water on all sides made them a perfect place to launder money. But there are currently, in anticipation of Cyprus having to raise this money over the weekend, there have been a lot of attempts to drag Russia into the bailout of Cyprus. They're referring to these plans as Plan B. Recently, earlier this week, Russia was not informed of the decisions that were going on in Cyprus toward the beginning of the week, so the expropriation was a shock to them. Prime Minister Medvedev referred to the Troika as behaving like a bull in a china shop, and likened its proposals, which would force Russian depositors to contribute their deposits to the rescue of Cypriot banks. It was compared to Soviet-era confiscations. Now, needless to say, this is creating major geopolitical tensions between the European Union and Russia. The implications of this are huge for other debtor nations in southern Europe: Spain, Greece, Ireland, Italy. So there are a number of questions that come up. And I'll say at the outset that this entire situation absolutely begs a Glass-Steagall solution, and from the United States, and then carried over into acted upon by the nations of Europe, sovereign nations of Europe. But the questions that come up, it was known that the move to expropriate depositors would create a massive panic, which it has. Why was it done? Was it sheer stupidity or something else? There are also, and then I'd like you to also address the broader geopolitical implications of the Cyprus crisis. What does it mean for the United States? What does it mean for other nations of Europe? What does it mean for Russia? So if you could address that.
Well, start right with where you ended, because that's where it is. This thing is not going to continue. It cannot. It now is geopolitical in the extreme. The United States itself is hopelessly bankrupt. That's a factor. In all the nations of Europe, you have, on the continent, you have only France and Germany which still have any significant credibility. Their credibility is being destroyed by them rapidly. So there's no hope. The U.S. situation is absolutely hopeless. You look at this in hyperinflation, which took over especially since 2007, but was started at the end of the term of office of Bill Clinton. as Graham Bliley, et cetera, right? And this was the greatest swindle ever pulled off inside the United States, was the Graham Bliley swindle, which a terrified then Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, who was under tremendous threats from all kinds of quarters, signed on to it. It was the worst thing he ever did, but he did it under tremendous pressure. This was and this had been planned long before Bill was ever president. It began in the beginning of at the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s. This whole swindle was pulled off. And the high point of the swindle was, of course, the George Bush administration, 3 George Bush administrations in point of fact. The old geezer and the young squib, the two of them. And then, of course, what's on now. So there is no hope for the continuation of the present world international monetary system now. India and China, of course, are major countries. There are other countries in the East who are independent countries in some degree and have an independent role. But the transatlantic region is the region that is crucial, because the world financial monetary system is actually located essentially in that region, around the Atlantic Ocean, on all shores. So we're on the end of the system. Now, the only way you could get out of this system, if you want to survive in the United States, if you want to have a life inside the United States, you will push through Glass-Steagall as early as you can, and I mean within weeks or days. Push it through now. It's the most important thing you can do for your life and the life of your family, the life of your friends inside the United States, and for the benefit of people in other parts of the world. This thing, if it blows, will mean that no one in the United States, even those who think they're very rich right now, they don't know what a real blowout is, because there will be nothing. Do you know what it's like for a nation or nations to reach the point that they have no money? They have no money in their banks, no money circulating in their accounts. Money has died. The greatest financial bubble ever conceived of, which would destroy the whole planet, starting with the transatlantic region. So that anybody who continues to oppose Glass-Steagall, whether wittingly or not, is a criminal, a mass criminal. There is no solution for the situation presently extant in the transatlantic region, except in Iceland, where they've decided to put Glass-Steagall through. And the only chance for the United States and the people of the United States is passing Glass-Steagall now. Now, what's the issue here? Why do people resist Glass-Steagall? Well, they're not really loyal Americans, I can tell you that. They're Wall Street types, and their interests lie in what? Since the time that a swindler became president of the United States, the United States economic interests have been chiefly, with some brief periods of exception, have been under the control of the British Empire. What happened was that in that situation, after the end of the term of one of our greatest presidents, Wall Street took over. And what was Wall Street? Wall Street was the British banking interest, the international British banking interest. And from that point on, the United States, up until the Civil War, the United States was dominated by the British banking interests, including some screwballs in Boston who were part of the same thing. Then again, we had the assassinations of presidents We had during the beginning of the 20th century. We were, in terms of Wall Street, we were puppets of the British Empire. We continued to be that until Franklin Roosevelt. And the moment that Franklin Roosevelt died, another puppet, Harry Truman, took over on behalf of the British interest and virtually said to the British Empire, do what you want to. I'm here. You can count on Truman. And Truman never did anything to make the British Empire unhappy. So that's the situation we're in. We're in now at a point where the American people are going to have to decide, as well as other nations, whether they themselves are morally fit to survive. Because if they don't pass Glass-Steagall, and if the consequences of not passing Glass-Steagall are allowed to continue, they won't have anything, even their lives. So the question is, are the American people so stupid that they would refuse to ram through Glass-Steagall now? I can assure you, and I can assure anyone, that if Glass-Steagall were enacted this week or next week, that the United States would come through magnificently, and the rest of the world would be saved from the terrible global catastrophe. If they don't have the guts to put Glass-Steagall through now, or the brains to cause them to know they should put it there, then woe be them. We warned them. We did everything we could to stop them from their foolishness. If they go ahead and continue to support the forces against Glass-Steagall, they have no one to blame for their death and their agony and shame but themselves. But the point is, why do they do that then? Because their bank accounts are generally controlled by the British Empire, as it has been for a long time. Wall Street is nothing but a tool of the British Empire, of the Queen. The Queen owns all the money. And what she represents is the British Empire, which is really an empire. It's not just something Great Britain. This involves many other nations. Most of the nations of Africa are nothing but slaves of the British monarchy. The entire Euro system is a slave of the British monarchy. And the same thing goes around much around the world. And even though India and China and some other countries in Asia are independent, if this system goes in the transatlantic region, if Glass-Steagall is not brought through in the transatlantic region, what you may lose is the human species.
Well, I've got a follow-up for you on that about partly what we ought to do instead. As you'd mentioned, there is continuing motion and discussion around Glass-Steagall, including in Iceland, which recently made some moves for passing the resolution there. Here in the U.S., there's definitely a fight. Earlier this week at the Conservative Political Action Committee meeting, U.S. Dallas Fed Chief Richard Fisher said he didn't call for Glass-Steagall, but he said we should, for one thing, ensure only the commercial banking side of banks. Second, we should have clear warnings for people to sign if they're engaged in not backed up activities. And third, we should break up the banks into smaller sizes, saying that since, I guess, too big to fail is a word that gets around, he said they should be too small to save. But this is part of the Brown-Kaufman scheme, which was pushed around last Congress, is to have an alternative to Glass-Steagall. So, on a much better front, yesterday, Congressman Colin Peterson in the Agriculture Committee, he said, I'm going to read this quote, the congressman said, 2 of the worst votes I ever made in this place were the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000 that exempted all of these swaps from any regulation or any margins. I didn't know any better. The other vote I made that was really bad is eliminating Glass-Steagall. We should never have done that, and I bought into that. You know, if we had Glass-Steagall back, this wouldn't be an issue here. You're putting taxpayers on the hook now. At the time we did the Modernization Act, there were $80 billion in swaps, in derivatives. We gave them legal certainty, we eliminated all the regulations requirements, and it went up to 700 trillion and blew up on us. So, with other schemes around, like this Cockamamie-Brown-Kaufman scheme, which is, I believe, no longer endorsed by Kaufman, of limiting the size of banks, it's a proposal that sounds good, but which exists, I believe, primarily to have a counter to Glass-Steagall, to draw support away from it. So it's good to know what the actual consequences of passing Glass-Steagall would be. Let me ask, what would happen in the world when the U.S. passes Glass-Steagall? What would we be doing then?
Well, first of all, people who know anything, and I think anyone over 5 years of age would probably be capable to qualify on this one, that there is no, what we're dealing with was called quantitative easing, was the real core of the worst thing ever done to the American people and to the world at large. What's quantitative easing? It is hyperinflation per se. It's not sustained by anything. Now, what happens if we cancel that system and go to Glass-Steagall? Well, first of all, since quantitative easing is simply hyperinflation. That's the word for it. It's not quantitative easing, it's deliberate hyperinflation. It's a swindle. The most crooked bank, the most crooked gambling hall you ever saw was quantitative easing. And what the first thing we're going to do, and we'll have to do, is the minute we put that into effect, the entire U.S. system is cut off from quantitative easing. What happens then? Well, without quantitative easing, we just cancel all the fake money. And we actually, instead of going to a monetarist system, and this is the key here, because the arguments that are made in defense of the swindle called Wall Street and similar kinds of things, the arguments are made that this is money. And money is a sacred form of something or other of value. Crap, that's not true. If you have a nation that doesn't produce anything, what's the value of its money? It's nothing. So therefore, if we put Glass-Steagall back through an operation, what happens? We do just fine. It won't be perfect because the damage has been done to the system. But there are two things that are required. First of all, you need Glass-Steagall as such. That's absolutely necessary. Without Glass-Steagall as such, this nation is dead. I don't care who heads it in that case. The nation is dead. This nation is about to go dead. All it will take is a crisis in Europe, in continental Europe, triggered by the craziness of what was done on Cyprus, the attempt to push that through. That can trigger a chain reaction inside the entire European system, especially the Western and Central European system, which will be sufficient to touch a chain reaction blowout of the entire transatlantic system of economies and nations. So anyone who's not pushing for Glass-Steagall now is therefore certified as either increasingly stupid or virtually brain dead. Because this is the only thing that will save this nation and save the people in this nation, is getting Glass-Steagall through. Well, people say, you're going to bankrupt us. No, we're not going to go bankrupt any people. We're going to bankrupt Wall Street, sure, so what? I don't miss Wall Street. I don't think we need Wall Street. I think quite the contrary. The sooner we're rid of it, the better off we are. We go back, the basis is not a monetary basis. The basis is essentially a credit system. What do I mean by a credit system? I mean the production of usable wealth. The production of usable wealth, which employs people and which produces all the things we need to eat and wear and whatnot, is what we want. The idea that money is value is a fraud. Money as a value is a relative value. It depends upon what is being produced and circulated, what is being consumed. So therefore, if we are producing, the product that we need to live on and to improve our lives on, then that's enough for us. We don't need the frou-frou. We don't need the funny dancers or things like that. What we need is a system in which we employ people productively. We educate them for good lives in the future, so forth. And this is not a matter of money. Money, as such, has no intrinsic value. No intrinsic economic value whatsoever. It's only, you call it a value, only when there is some value there. Now, who's being employed in productive labor? Who is being employed in producing things which represent the value that they're talking about? What you have is, you don't have value. What do you have? You have quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? Well, we're producing less than ever before, which means that of the total money, mass of money known as credit out there, the actual amount of credit, which is shrinking. So what they're doing is simply printing more money without any more production or circulation of goods. No consumption of goods. Nothing is real. It's all fake. So if we put to Glass-Steagall, the immediate implication would be that you'd have Wall Street would go bankrupt. That's no loss. A lot of other things would go bankrupt, which are speculative in nature. That's no loss. And what we would be doing was going out there and getting people employed in productive activities and trying to increase their productivity and building some large projects on a credit system. The issue of federal credit in particular. And the things, we will rebuild what was once called the auto industry. Maybe in a new form, but new expression. We need that kind of industry again. We need NWAPA. We need a water system. Otherwise, we're in real trouble physically. So what reality lies in the increase of the productive powers of labor, the ability of people to think and use the power to think for purposes of increase in productivity. Those are the things that are real. And therefore, if we did that, you know what would happen? Well, we'd cut out most of the waste. It said wouldn't be there. Wall Street's waste wouldn't be there. It would vanish. Because the firms that the U.S. federal government is bound to defend are the values which fill the purpose of our Constitution, which are generally productive things or things which relate to productive things. I mean, for example, you have dependents in a family, and that sort of thing. They're not working, but they are part of the system of the family and the household which does the work. And they're a significant percentile of the total population is the working population, the income-earning population. And so, therefore, what we would simply do is say, well, get rid of that waste. Cancel all this funny money, all this quantitative easing, which is a complete fraud. Nobody owes anything in reality for quantitative easing. Cancel it. It's worthless. What did they produce last week? What did they produce the week before? Nothing. So Glass-Steagall means that you take the work we have and the people employed we have, and we do two things. We have to provide protection for them. They don't have jobs. They don't have skills at the point. We are going to have to carry them. We're going to have to help them improve their productivity and opportunities in life. We will do that because we are investing in our own people. We're investing in the welfare of our people. We're investing in their productivity, future productivity and present productivity. And we're going to have a core of people who are actually more vigorously productive, the more vigorously innovative. We're going to take great projects and we're going to finance these under a credit system of the type that a famous President of the United States put into effect. We had a couple of these guys who did exactly like Franklin Roosevelt, for example. And so we had also some others we could go through. And in that case, we would simply recognize that it is the creation of useful product through the ingenuity, personal ingenuity, and abilities and skills of the population. This is the means of creating wealth. Creating wealth means you're producing wealth. Not money, but wealth. And you will restrict the use of money as much as possible to that which corresponds to physical credit. We could do that tomorrow morning, in principle. Tomorrow morning, we could decree this is the new system. We could outlaw this crazy kind of money. And simply go ahead as we had before, while Glass-Steagall was still in operation. So you're going back to Glass-Steagall, you're saving the nation from the threat of destruction in any case, or the failure of the economic system. You're also, by allowing the system of looting, hyperinflation, to go ahead, you've now reached the point that the entirety of the transatlantic region can no longer continue to exist. Therefore, the enactment of Glass-Steagall inside the United States would be sufficient to create a situation throughout the transatlantic region to save the United States and to save the economy and to save the world as well. And all the other things we've been talking about so far tonight here are all contingent on our ability to bring about the installation of that change in policy. That change in policy, and with a spread of the understanding of what that means, what that policy means in practice, and we're back on business of recovery. And it will not be good at the first. It will be extremely difficult. We have so many unskilled people, many people who are poorly educated, don't know how to work if they had the job was offered to them, or wouldn't want to work if they have that job offered either. But the point is, we're going to have a tough time in any case. But it's better to have a tough time and with the future built into it, and to have no time at all.
All right, now I'd like to ask you the final question of the evening. And this is also a question about Glass-Steagall. And this week has been really phenomenal in a lot of respects. Among others, we've had the entire policy committee in from all corners of the country in the Washington, D.C. area and descending upon Washington, D.C. They're the elected representatives, in many cases the people who they ran against in the 2012 election campaigns. And we've also brought in, as we're having this conference this Saturday, there are a number of people who have come in from across the country to take part in this conference, as well as getting the opportunity to organize in Washington, D.C. And in virtually every case of this type of organizing, you have our representatives are in a sense super constituents, because, for example, with the former candidates, LaRouche Democratic candidates, these are people who are representing the tens of thousands of voters who put these candidates' names on the ballot, who viewed their future as tied up in the success of the LaRouche Democratic slate. And so while this is happening with our former candidates and also the super constituents from other parts of the country, we have the decision by the House on Thursday to adjourn. They've decided to go home, despite the threats of bank runs and all sorts of calamities. And it was interesting because recently PBS published a documentary going through the really the onset of the financial crisis, beginning with the repeal of Glass-Steagall. And one interesting fact that they dug up was that in the election year leading into the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, the financial services sector, kicked in $350 million in contributions and lobbying efforts to members of Congress, targeting these members of Congress to go ahead and repeal Glass-Steagall. Now, on the LaRouche PAC website, we did people the courtesy of breaking that down. Per capita, with 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 members of the Senate, Wall Street shelled out an average of $654,205.61 on each member of Congress in this effort to repeal Glass-Steagall. It was also interesting because Sandy Weill was the strongest proponent, the former CEO of Citigroup, and the man who really got the repeal of Glass-Steagall formerly had a placard on his wall that said "the Shatterer of Glass-Steagall." He had put in a call to then Treasury Secretary Bob Rubin at the time, announcing that he had some real big news, and Rubin went on to ask him, "What? That you bought the government?" But to bring things up to date, I'll just remind people that in late July of this year, it was Sandy Weill himself who came out publicly in strong support of the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, of separating the commercial from investment banks, and I just wanted to give a little bit of an illustration here, because $350 million spent on both houses of Congress back at the end of the 1990s. According to recent statistics, in the 2012 election, the financial services sector contributed in the House of Representatives a total of $104,938,698 to both Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives. So $104 million and $42 million to in total to the Senate. So my question to you, given these figures, what is a congressman actually worth? What is the value of a member of Congress?
Well, I would say that if that's your term, then they are prostitutes. If they are not of that persuasion, then they probably have a different kind of destiny or intention in mind. Now, the fact of the matter is that the problem we have is our people, our citizens, and their children. Since the assassination of the two Kennedy brothers, the United States has been declining in any measure of real terms per capita, constantly all the way through. There's been no exception. And what we have now is a system which has no sense of what value is. As a system, you have people in the system who have senses of value. You have some people who are productive, they're creative, and so forth. They're employed. Some of them are officially employed in some useful capacity, notable capacity. But in general, our people are cowards. They don't have a sense of their own value. To them, value is money value. They don't think of themselves as producing something, as being useful to the society, as adding something, contributing something to society. The productivity of the American citizen per capita has been collapsing ever since the end of actually since the end of the Kennedy assassination. It's been declining. People are worth less in real terms per capita than they were earlier. We are vastly worse off. We are vastly less valuable per capita than ever before in our lives. We are approaching the nadir of worthlessness in our own existence. We are incapable, it appears, to mobilize themselves to correct these errors, these faults. We are looking at a people who are on the brink of adopting extermination and loving it, because that's what they attach themselves to. Anyone who believes in quantitative easing is clinically insane, formally, and probably should be put into some place for the criminally or otherwise insane, where they are given custody and taken care of, and their own voice and judgment is no longer inquired for, because they're not worth anything. They don't produce anything, for the most part. They don't have the ideas, the skills, or the determination which would make them useful. They're simply squatting there, protesting against the state condition of existence, a condition which they insist on imposing upon themselves. You have young people, late teenage. They will never want to do work, useful work. No intention to do so. And they were angry at you because you didn't make them do something that made them useful. So what we've done is we've caused a moral depravity among our own citizens. And the depravity rate has increased with the succession of generations. You've come to a point that the only thing that's going to save this nation and other nations is the realization that what we have believed in the main, among most of our people, was clinically insane and criminal, probably. And therefore they desire to change their ways. And the time has come, they will either change their ways or they will become extinct and drag the rest of them with us. And that's where we are. This is a hopeless situation if you accept the conditions which people consider normal and reasonable. What they say, we voted on it. What if they voted for was insane? And obviously insane, provably insane. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing in the majority the idea of entertainment is an example of this. All aspects of life are filled with absolutely worse than useless features. People spend their lives on useless, counterproductive things. They are people who have lost the quality of ability to survive. And they want you to finance their enjoyment of that still. No, that's how we got into this mess, because we allowed ourselves to be bought. We allowed ourselves to be bought by the desire for people to admire us for being like them. You'd be popular. You're a useless person, but in your crowd, you're popular. It's the case of the pursuit of the inedible by the inedible.
And that brings a conclusion to our webcast for tonight. Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Leandra. And thank you for watching. Good night.